Hi everybody, welcome to the AV Geeks Lunchtime streaming show. I'm Skip Alzheimer, and we watch old 16mm films here. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Anyways, I'm Skip Alzheimer, welcome to the AV Geeks Lunchtime streaming show. 16mm films, blah blah blah. That last film was Frontiers of the North. It was a kind of newsreel travelogue, and it was from the Mogul Brothers collection via the Orgone Archive in Pittsburgh. And ultimately, I didn't catch, it was a Canadian company that made the film, but I didn't log that information. So, hope everybody had a good weekend. What do we got? It's summer. It's hot here. It's very, very hot. If you're in North Carolina, especially in our part of central North Carolina, take care. Hydrate. Don't be outside too long because it's going to be, the heat index is going to be 109 degrees. So this is when AV Geeks go underground and enjoy being in a dark and cool room. All right, here's Summer on the Farm. Let's see how well they fare.
In June, and Joan and Jerry Johnson are at their favorite fishing spot. What is it that Joan sees and points out to Jerry? It's a frog, a leopard frog. You can tell he's a leopard frog by his rounded, light-bordered spots. He's at least 3 years old. For the frog, this dragonfly resting on a rock nearby would be a dainty bite. But the frog won't get this one. One of the fishermen seems to have a bite. It's Joan's line. She waits until the fish takes the bait. There. She hooks the fish, and in he comes. Jerry's getting ready to take him off the line. Here he is, a sunfish. Not very large, but big enough to keep. Jerry knows just how to take that fish off the hook. Now it's time to go home. Joan sticks the sharp fish hook in the cork. That's all the fishing for today, but Joan and Jerry will come back to the pond many times during the summer months. On their way along the road that leads back to the farmhouse, Joan notices some June wildflowers. They are wild roses growing in the tall grass beside the path, growing fresh, bright in the June sun. Joan leaves them. Wildflowers and billowy white clouds sailing across the blue sky are signs of summer. The tall grass, too, is a sign of summer, the season when things grow fast. Near the pasture is the field where Mr. Johnson is cultivating young corn on this bright June day. The Johnson tractor pulls the cultivator along the rows of growing corn. The cultivators break up the hard earth around the corn plants. The corn Mr. Johnson planted in May is growing fast now that the days are warm and sunny. Everything is growing. In the orchard, there were only blossoms a few weeks ago, but now on the same branches are small green apples, and high up in the apple tree, a young robin has grown big enough to leave its nest. It's fun to watch things grow, and things grow fast in June. Joan and Jerry are happy to be living on a farm in summer. Now July is here, and it's haying time in the fields of the Johnson farm. The tractor goes round and round the field with a sickle bar attached to it cutting the fresh green clover. The clover is left on the ground to dry in the warm summer sun. In another part of the field, the hay is already dry enough to be loaded onto the hay rack. While Mr. Johnson works on top of the rack loading the hay, Jerry drives the tractor. This is one of Jerry's favorite summertime jobs. This loading machine saves a lot of hard work on a hot day. But piling up the steady stream of hay keeps Mr. Johnson very busy. Now the load is high enough to take to the barn. This hay will help feed the Johnson cows and horses and sheep next winter. Other feed for the stock will come from the corn now growing along the road that leads to the barn. The corn has grown fast in the summer sun. Young ears with their plumes or silks have already grown out from the stalks. It makes Mr. Johnson feel good to see his corn crop coming along so well. If the corn gets the rain it needs, there will be a good crop this year. While Jerry and his father are busy with the hay, Joan is in the garden cutting a bouquet of flowers for the house. These zinnias are just right for the dinner table. And now over at the barn, the hay is almost all unloaded. Mr. Johnson puts the big grab fork into the hay. The rope on the fork runs up and through to the other end of the barn, where it is fastened to a team of horses. As Jerry drives them forward, the horses pull on the rope and lift the hay up toward the hayloft. The horses keep on pulling until the hay goes all the way into the loft. Now it is August, and here are Joan and Jerry picking blackberries in a patch near the woods. Later on, Joan will help her mother make pies and jam and jelly from the berries. Black ones that are ripe and juicy, and red ones that haven't ripened yet, grow side by side on the bushes. Some of the berries will never get to Mother's kitchen. That's enough berry picking for today, but more will be ripe tomorrow. On the way home, Joan stops to look at something on a bush along the path. It's a butterfly with orange and black wings. And right over there is another butterfly. There are many kinds of butterflies in the pasture on this day in August. Late summer flowers are growing along the path to the house. The one Jerry picks is a kind of sunflower. In the garden near the house, Mrs. Johnson is at work. The tomatoes are at their best now. Stooping to pick the tomatoes is hard work for Mother. And this is a good chance for Joan and Jerry to help. This year, the vines are heavy with tomatoes ripened by the August sun. Jerry is careful not to bruise them. Mother will can some of these for the family to eat next winter. Over at the edge of the garden where the tall red flowers grow, Joan is surprised to see a big garden spider. It looks ugly, but the garden spider isn't poisonous. The spider's web is its home, and it is also a trap for the insects the spider eats. In the shade of a tree near the house, Mrs. Johnson is preparing a surprise for Joan and Jerry.
Joan! Jerry!
Joan and Jerry leave the garden and start for the house. This is the first ripe watermelon of the season. It was grown in the Johnsons' own melon patch and cooled in the cellar. When a melon is ripe like this, it cracks open easily. How red and juicy it is. No wonder Joan and Jerry come running. With a sharp knife, Mother begins to cut the melon into long, thin slices. Slices that are easy to hold and easy to eat. It tastes just as good as it looks. Watermelon is a summer treat worth working for and worth waiting for. Yes, summer is a good time to live on the farm. Summer, the time when days are warm and everything is growing.
Sorry, I was taken back by the beauty of the color and then the damage, the water damage. Basically what happens is, let's see if I have an example. I can, yeah. So what happens is you have a can, and these, it's interesting, there's a bunch of S's in the smalls that got water in them. And that's because they were on the bottom shelf in a basement when Hurricane Fran hit. And so the basement, the power went out and the sump pump wasn't working, and so there was 8 inches of water. And so what happened is the water started filling up, and it would seep in, and then it would begin to affect the emulsion in the film, and it would start sticking to the base. And what's interesting is not every can. Some cans were more airtight than others, or more watertight than others, and they survived. But yeah, there's hundreds of films that were affected by that. It's very tragic. The other side to that was that I got contacted by a experimental filmmaker, Bill Morrison, who was looking for damaged film for his film Acacia, where he had a lot of 35 millimeter film that had nitrate damage. And so I was able to give him some of the damaged film from my collection that he used in Acacia. So I didn't feel as bad about it because it was repurposed and used in its damaged form. Anyhow, behind me, I've got the film scanner, and we got a film set up. Getting a job is a job. Enjoy.
Finding the right job is one of the most important things you will ever do. It can mean the difference between success and failure. Graduating from high school or technical school or even college does not assure you of getting the job you may want. When you apply for a job, you're really promoting yourself. Getting a job is a job itself, and you should work as hard at that as you intend to work in your new employment. An employer is in business to make a profit and wants to know, can you help? Let's investigate the steps to take in getting a job and their importance in deciding if you will be hired. Before applying...
All right, there's a weird problem here.
should know yourself. Aptitude, interest, and personality tests are designed to determine the occupational areas in which you are most likely to be successful. Testing services are available at many schools, state employment offices, and major companies. If you answer the questions truthfully and put forth your best efforts, these tests should help you determine what you're best suited to do. Next, you should prepare a personal data sheet. This is often called a personal resume and gives a brief picture of you showing what you have to offer to an employer. It should include your name, age, address, educational background, work experience, if any, and references. You should also indicate the kind of job for which you think you're best suited. The third step is to obtain permission from at least 3 people to use their names as references. Use references who know something about you and can be specific about your accomplishments and qualities. It is very important that you list people with whom you've been in contact recently. As time passes, people are likely to be less enthusiastic about recommending you. It is to your advantage to use people who have enough interest in you to return the forms promptly. After thoroughly investigating yourself, you know what kind of job you want. The next step is to let the persons or company who can use your services know that you're available. Don't depend solely on friends or relatives for job leads. Although they may be helpful, there are a number of more reliable sources for leads to job opportunities. State employment agencies provide information on present occupational needs as well as sources of job openings. There is no charge for their services. Private agencies are in business to place qualified people in job openings. There may be a fee for their services. Local, state, and federal governmental agencies often have excellent job opportunities. You can obtain information on application procedures from any governmental office. High schools, colleges, and youth centers maintain placement bureaus that aid in finding employment. Local newspapers carry a daily listing of opportunities in a variety of occupations. You may wish to send a letter of application to the company for which you would like to work. A general letter of application informs the employer of your desire to work for the company and gives information about you. You should also specify the kind of job you would like to have, or a visit to the employment office of selected companies often prove to be profitable. Now that you've taken the preliminary steps, the real work begins, that of selling your ability to the employer. Let's observe 2 young people as they apply for employment and note the right and wrong way of making a favorable impression.
We're looking for a job.
Are all of you here seeking employment?
Nah, just me and Joe. The rest of the guys just came along.
What kind of employment are you seeking?
I don't know. What you got?
You should go to apply for employment alone. And remember that you're being observed from the moment you walk into the office. This same young man would make an altogether different impression if he entered in this manner.
Good morning. My name is Eddie Davis, and I read in the newspapers that you were accepting applications for machine technician trainees. I would like to file an application, please.
Certainly. Please fill out this application. You may use the table there.
Thank you very much.
Completing an application form correctly is an important part of getting the job. This is usually the first contact the employer will have with you. Consequently, the first impression of you is formed. The application form should be read carefully and completely before you begin answering the questions. Don't hesitate to ask for clarification if there are questions you don't understand. It is good practice to have a data sheet in your possession with such information as your Social Security number, employment record, educational record, dates, addresses, and telephone numbers of references. There are some common errors made in filling out an application. you should try to avoid making these mistakes. For example, in giving your date of birth, don't give the current year out of habit. Place of birth should show the city and state, not street address or filing of an application. In many cases, the impression you make during this interview will determine if you will be hired.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay. I understand that you're seeking employment as a machine technician trainee, Eddie.
Yeah, I had a little bit of that in high school. Just as good as any job. I just need a job.
I see here you didn't list the subjects you took in high school. What subjects did you like best?
I didn't like any of them. I'm not very good at school.
What do you usually do in your spare time? Do you have any special interests or hobbies that you can share with us?
No? No, I guess I don't do too much of anything. Nothing.
Why do you want to work with this company, Joyce?
Well, I need a job, and I heard you had some openings, so I decided to come over.
Yes, I see. Well, if we were to offer you a job with our company, what salary would you expect?
Oh, gee. Well, whatever you pay everybody else, that'd be all right with me.
What about your plans and thoughts for the future?
Yeah. See, I'm real interested in acting, and I need a job to kind of tide me over until big break hits me.
I see.
Can you read or speak any language other than English?
No. And my teacher says I'm not very good at English either.
Did you participate in any activities while in high school?
Yeah, but not at school.
Like to stick a gun?
No. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eddie. I appreciate you taking your time to come down and talk with us today.
Don't I get the job?
Well, we'll consider your application, and we'll be in touch within a week or so.
we just saw two young people during an interview for employment. Chances are they will not be hired. Why not? Well, first, their dress was inappropriate for an interview. Extreme fashions may appeal to your friends, but they will have a negative effect on an interviewer. Second, their behavior in the reception room did not reflect maturity. Remember, you're being observed from the moment you enter the office. Never take a seat unless you're invited to do so. Always be prepared to answer questions that are not directly related to the job, and give complete answers, not an abrupt yes or no. Avoid trying to be a comedian. It is also good practice to know something about the company before going to the interview. Now, let's observe how these two applicants conduct themselves in a manner that will favorably impress the interviewers.
Good morning. My name is Eddie Davis, and I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Marino.
Yes, Mr. Davis. Please have a seat.
Thank you.
Good morning. I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mrs. Lewis. My name is Joyce Edwards.
Have a seat, Miss Edwards. Mrs. Wilson will be with you shortly.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Marino. I'm Eddie Davis.
I'm glad to know you, Eddie. Please have a seat.
Thank you.
I'm impressed with the information that you've listed here on your application, Eddie. I see that you're seeking employment as a machine technician trainee.
Yes, I've taken several technical courses in high school, and I've always enjoyed tinkering with and repairing machines. I think I have the background to fit into your trainee program.
Your application indicates that you were a business major in high school.
Yes, I've always had a deep interest in merchandising and marketing. Well, that's why I feel I'd do well in your merchandising trainee program.
What do you usually do in your spare time? Do you have any special hobbies or any kind of special interests?
Well, my hobby is rebuilding motorcycle engines. I also get in quite a bit of motorcycle riding, too.
Why do you want to work for this company, Joyce?
Well, your company has been well established for a number of years, and after talking with some of your employees, I found that working conditions and chances for advancement are excellent.
If we were to offer you a job with our firm, what salary would you expect?
The salary advertised in the paper would be satisfactory.
Have you given much thought in terms of future plans?
Well, I hope my work here is satisfactory and I meet your expectations and possibly get a promotion to supervisor.
Do you speak any language other than English?
I understand you have a number of Spanish-speaking customers. Well, I took Spanish for 1 year in high school, and I can understand simple conversations.
Well, very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. I appreciate you coming in, and we'll notify you at the end of the week if something should develop. And I might add the chances of you getting a job are very, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Murray.
You bet.
Miss Edwards, you will receive written notification of your acceptance within a few days. I'm sure you'll be an asset to our company.
Thank you.
If you're not given the assurance of being hired at the conclusion of the interview, you should follow up with a letter or a telephone call. Getting the right job is very important to you. Patience and hard work are necessary in job hunting. And don't be discouraged if you're not successful with your first applications. Profit from mistakes you might have made and try again. It often takes several attempts to be successful. Getting a job is simply a matter of convincing an employer of your worth to the company. Now, keep in mind those tips we've given you. And happy job hunting.
I forgot to turn the mic off. Sorry about that. It was weird. So the film was twisted and was rewound that way, and I didn't see it. And so it was just acting. It was really messed up, and that threw me. So I apologize for that. It's not really part of how 16mm film is supposed to work. It's not really the plan. Let's learn about nature's plan. Enjoy.
In the beginning, there was the water of the oceans. And the water that dropped as rain from the clouds to make the land alive. But here is a land without water. This is the kind of life we would know without water. For no living thing can exist without water. Absolutely nothing. Not even a weed. For the land cracks open and dries out. And the earth gapes wide and dies. Yet from the beginning, long before man came, there was a natural, undisturbed system of water distribution, a system we call today a water cycle. Let's understand what a water cycle is. It is the continuous process by which water from the ocean is drawn into the air by evaporation. Formed into clouds, condensed to water, released as rain and snow upon the earth to find its way back to the ocean to start another cycle exactly like the previous one. It is a process that goes on and on unceasingly. Now let's see how it works. Liquid water is forever flowing downward, from the air to the earth as rain and snow, and flowing from the earth down to the sea. The sea in turn gives water back to the air in the form of vapor. And so there is a never-ending cycle of flow from the oceans to the air, from the air to the earth, and from the earth back again to the sea. The force that moves this water lies in the heat delivered by the sun to the earth, and in the ability of water to store this heat. When water contains very little heat, it is the solid we call ice. When ice absorbs sufficient heat, it melts into liquid water. If liquid water is warmed, it will turn to vapor and rise into the air. Warm air can hold a large amount of water vapor, but if the air is chilled, some of the vapor will turn back to water. Here on the coast of California, we can see how the cold ocean has chilled the air above it, condensing some of the vapor into tiny particles of water which appear as fog. This fog moves steadily toward the land, carried by the great transcontinental air current that moves across the continent from west to east. As the warm earth gives its heat to the fog particles, they again turn into invisible water vapor and disappear into thin air, like this. But the air continues to carry the stream of invisible moisture forward across the country. Day and night, winter and summer, this huge river of water vapor moves onward, up out of the ocean and over the United States. At all times there is in this moving river enough moisture to give a considerable amount of rain, but it can become useful to sustain life only as parts of it are delivered from the air to the earth. Mountains are among nature's most important agents in bringing the moisture to the land, for they force the moving air currents upward, high above the earth where it is very cold. This shadow on the mountain reflects a cloud about to make a storm, for the moisture is condensing into a cloud as the rising air is beginning to be chilled. The vapor is turning to particles of water, too small to fall as rain, but this condensing process releases heat, whose energy causes the air to expand and rise like a huge balloon into the very much colder atmosphere high above. Here it is chilled once more. And now the rapidly condensing moisture builds up into this giant thunderhead, which climbs until some of its water particles turn to tiny ice crystals. This development frequently prepares the way for rain, for now the particles of moisture remaining in the cloud may adhere to the growing ice crystals until they become big enough to fall as snow or melt and turn to rain. Much of the water of the western states is produced in this way by the mountains. On the plains east of the Rocky Mountains, the rainfall is caused by another kind of storm. We can see how this small block of ice chills the air beneath it and makes it contract. In the same way, the air over Canada is chilled by the cooling of the land as winter approaches. This cold, heavy air flows southward into the United States. Here it may meet currents of warm, lighter air that carry moisture northward from the Gulf of Mexico. As these currents meet, the cold, heavy air acts exactly as the mountain barrier did, causing the lighter, warm air to flow upward and thus produce a storm. But this is only the beginning of the story. Now we come to the critical part. For after the storm has delivered the water to the earth, we must understand how nature accomplishes the job of distribution, of storing and moving this water before it is evaporated or returned to the sea, making it possible for the water to be used by the land and by the living things who live on and off the land. Watersheds are nature's agents in dealing with this problem. Exactly what is a watershed? This is a watershed. So is this. And this, many miles away. In other words, a watershed is simply a natural basin where water can be trapped and stored and distributed by a stream, or in the case of a large watershed, by a river system. Let us see how this water is trapped and distributed in one of these natural reservoirs. You will see that above the parent rock lies a thin blanket of soil produced through the ages by the forces of nature. This soil is the heart of the natural reservoir that holds the moving water. Above it lies another darker layer that plays an equally important part. This dark earth contains the dead leaves and rotting roots of trees and smaller plants and is tied into a firm, organized structure by the living roots. This is nature's sponge that absorbs and holds the water, passing it down slowly to the reservoir beneath. Above it grows a cover of forest plants that protects the soil from the striking force of hail and raindrops. And over all grows the protecting forest that builds and guards this thin sponge of capacious earth and absorbent rotting vegetation, which can hold 5 gallons of water in each cubic foot of its substance. Over a vast extent of forest land, it can store more water than all the reservoirs that man can build, and do it without cost to man. After the rain has fallen on the mountain and the water starts on its long journey down the valley, every bush and tree does its share to intercept the flow and scatter it over the hillside. The smaller plants too help to tame the water, spreading its flow over the surface of the ground until it sinks through passageways dug by roots and worms and insects into the soil below. Here it filters through the earth, growing at last into a vast underground river that moves slowly downward toward the sea. Ponds and marshes do their share, and the beaver help too, adding their dams to nature's storage system, letting the store of water sink into the soil to join the hidden flow. Where the soil is shallow, this hidden stream may spring to life again in the open, feeding brooks that grow as other springs join them beneath their surface. So the streams on the surface join with, but each is dependent on the other to form inseparable parts of one great whole, and all owe their existence to nature's storage system in the soil that holds the water in place. In the high mountains, the snow forms one of nature's most important reserves of water. Here, the moisture that falls in winter may be contained for many months, flowing out slowly in the summer when the sun warms the ice crystals and turns them back to water. The shade of the forest helps to delay the melting snow, thus prolonging the ability of the mountain to maintain a steady flow of water. The branches may intercept great quantities of snow and rain which never reach the ground. Here we see the moisture evaporating from the wet branches of the spruce forest after a heavy rain. But the trees use much water in their growth, and sometimes the water yield may be increased by thinning the forests, so the snow may settle among them in slow melting drifts like this. So with the help of nature, every hillside stores its share of water in 100,000 tiny reservoirs, banks of snow, beds of moss, plant and grass stem, fern and root, and rotting wood, and beds of porous soil. Each part does its own microscopic share to hold back its own drop of water, letting it out in due time to join the drops from 100 million other sources, flowing into springs and brooks and rivers. In the building of this watershed, nature offers many other values to man. For while the trees are growing to protect the soil, they are also building timber. And the grass is building forage that can be harvested by animals and turned into meat and wool and leather. And the whole environment of land and trees and water, together with the fish and birds and animals that they support, offers man another value in its beauty and the opportunity for recreation and enjoyment. This, then, has been the story of watershed and water cycle, of the natural storage and distribution of water before the coming of mankind.
Great. I didn't mention Diane Kay from the last film that we showed, the Getting a Job is a Job, which I love that film. I love films that show people messing up regarding jobs and dealing with customers and all that. I think everybody does. But Diane Kay, I personally thought was the most attractive of the Bradford sisters on It Is Enough. And she was wearing a Wii magazine t-shirt, which was very cheeky. That's all I'm going to say about that. As you know, we have a lot of mining safety videos or films. And here's one that I don't think we've seen. Rocking Bolt Safety. Enjoy. It's rocking.
Since the beginning of recorded history, men have gone underground to mine the minerals and metals needed for the growth of civilization. During the exploration and exploitation of these natural resources, their lives were endangered by the hazards of falling ground. They learned from bitter experience not to depend on the natural self-supporting quality of overhead rock to protect them from bodily injury. They've found that openings made in the earth for the removal of ore set up unbalanced stresses in the surrounding roof and walls, causing the top of the opening to sag, until a point was reached where the overlying rock either supported itself or it fell, causing a cave-in. To compensate for these unbalanced stresses that cause the collapse of mine openings, a means of ground support was needed. The most practicable and readily available material was wooden posts, so timbering became the principal or conventional means of maintaining underground openings. To determine the amount of support needed for their protection, early miners worked largely by rule of thumb and timbered by trial and error. Even today, timbering to prevent collapse of mine workings is still governed by experience. Largely from the dislodgement or collapse of inadequate timbering, the number of fatal and serious injuries from fall of ground accidents also increased as the mining industry continued to grow. With these occurrences, other methods of ground support were developed. One of these, rock bolting, proved most successful. The effectiveness of rock bolting is shown by this installation in a lead mine at St. Joseph, Missouri. These bolts, including those interlaced with continuous bearing plates of channel iron, were installed over 60 years ago. The bolted ground is as firm and sound today as it was the day the bolts were installed. As methods of ore extraction changed from hand loading to mechanical continuous mining, more and more mines began using rock bolts as their chief means of ground support. Besides providing safe and adequate ground support, rock bolting allows work to be carried on without the interference of standing or overhead timbers. More room is left for mobile equipment and haulage vehicles. They can be maneuvered easier and safer in entries where bolts replace timbers, especially at intersections. In high workings where it's difficult, if not impossible, to use timbering, installing rock bolts to support the back is particularly advantageous. The absence of timbers obstructing the mine openings also contributes to better ventilation. And it also has been found that bolts are less likely to be dislodged by blasting than conventional timber supports. In some mines, due to the nature of the earth's strata or surrounding rock formation, different reinforcement materials are used in conjunction with the bolts to provide a larger bearing surface to help prevent cracking and spalling of the rock. In such situations, rock bolts may be supplemented with wooden blocks, wire mesh, steel landing mats, or iron channels. Sometimes special bolting patterns are required for wide spans, such as at intersections, and under certain conditions it may be advisable to strengthen the regular pattern by adding more bolts, or by installing extra long bolts to effectively solve a difficult ground control problem. The exact length of the bolts will depend on mining conditions and geologic structure. There are many different types of bolts or bolt anchors being manufactured, but generally they can be grouped into two main categories. The first is the conventional or plug type anchor, which is used mostly in hard rock. The second is the bale type, which is favored in softer rocks. Also needed in conjunction with the bolts is a washer or plate to act as a bearing surface between the bolt head and the exterior surface of the rock. These plates allow the proper tension to be applied to the bolt to effectively anchor it in the hole. This cutaway section of an ore body and surrounding strata will better explain the principles of rock bolting. When a mine tunnel or opening is made in the earth, the overlying weight or forces that act upon the stratified rock deposits cause the immediate roof to sag. If rock bolts and bearing plates are installed in the mine roof, the layers of stratified rock deposits are compressed and a strong consolidated beam is formed. Now very little sag occurs. This demonstrates the principle of beam building. The simplest method of rock bolting is by suspension. In this method, the roof is held up or suspended by securing the loose pieces of rock to the solid ground above it. The bolts must be long enough, strong enough, and sufficiently anchored into the solid ground to support the weight of the loose roof. In non-stratified rock formations or in openings that are largely self-supporting, such as arched openings, rock bolts are installed in a radial direction. These bolts extend through the non-stratified or fractured rock and are anchored in the surrounding ground. A zone of radial compression in the rock is created around the opening by the tension in the bolts. Installed in a systematic pattern, the bolts form a series of rigid blocks by consolidating the fragmented formation around each bolt. What would correspond to a natural arch is formed by the blocks keying together. The bolted zone is then more capable of accepting a larger load and is more self-supporting. The keying effect can be demonstrated by this model. The metal frame has been filled with crushed rock, which represents the non-stratified fractured zone of a mine roof. The rock has been bolted together with miniature rock bolts and bearing plates. The bolted layer of crushed rock not only supports itself, but also the weight of an additional bucketful of rock. To further increase the effectiveness of rock bolts, a bolting pattern should be adopted, one that is suitable to existing mining methods and conditions and the physical properties of the rock. With a uniform bolting pattern, interaction between adjoining bolts will be continuous and far more effective in controlling unknown conditions than random spotting of individual bolts. The safety of miners who must work in newly opened areas or places just recently blasted is greatly increased if rock bolts are installed as soon as possible after the opening is made. Rock bolts are especially effective when they're installed directly after blasting, where within a short space of time they can be exerting a stabilizing pressure on the loosened rock surface while preventing air slacking. Before starting the drilling and bolting cycle, it's important to bar down loose rock that could possibly fall during bolting operations. This is to protect not only the bolting crew, but any other workers in the area. Bolt installation begins by drilling holes for the bolts according to the approved bolting plan. The drills used should be equipped with suitable dust collectors and water dispensing devices to control drill dust, thereby helping to prevent respiratory health hazards such as silicosis. Hole diameter must be closely controlled with the expansion type rock bolt. The hole size must be close to the manufacturer's recommended hole diameter for the anchor used. It's especially important if the bolts are supporting a steep wall or rib. The exact hole depth, however, is not as important, since the bolt need not bear against the back of the hole to anchor successfully. Expansion type bolts in widespread use today are the 3/4 inch and 5/8 inch diameter, grade 55 high strength, or grade 75 extra high strength steel. The expansion shell bolt is simple to install by hand, compressed air, or electrical power. It is anchored through the compressive action of the shell expanding against the inside wall of the drill hole as the threaded, tapered plug is screwed down into it by the rotating bolt. After the bolt is tightened with an air-operated impact wrench or bolting machine, the torque is checked to ensure that the bolt is properly tensioned. Either hand-operated or electronic digital torque indicators are used. The amount of tension should be sufficient to bind the strata or tie the rock surface to competent ground, but it must not exceed the yield point of the bolt. Tension applied at the time of installation must be maintained if the rock bolts are to be effective. Periodic checks should be made. A change in torque reading will indicate a proportionate change in tension of the bolt. The bolt must then be retightened as necessary to maintain the proper torque or eliminate the loss of further tension. Polyester resin rock bolting has come into wide use as the cost of resin has been reduced and improved installation techniques have been developed. Hole depth and hole diameter are important for correct resin bolt installation. The hole depth should be no more than 1 inch deeper than the length of the steel bolt, and the hole diameter should be 1/4 inch larger than the bolt diameter. Roof bolts commonly used for resin bolting consist of headed rebar, threaded rebar, or steel stock with deformations embossed along the length of the bolt. The resin and its catalyst are contained in a single plastic tube separated by either a plastic membrane or by a thin film of reacted resin and catalyst. Inserting and rotating the steel bolt through the column of resin in the drill hole mixes the catalyst with the resin. The drill or bolting machine then holds the bolt in place until the resin sets. The advantages of resin bolting include a continuous bond along the length of bolt, concentrated restraint along a short section of bolt when fractures try to develop, complete water sealing of the bolt hole, and increased shearing resistance to lateral roof movement. Even if some section of a resin bolt breaks, the roof is still reinforced along the unbroken sections of the bolt. Correct bolt length and the anchor capacity of a particular horizon in the rock are usually determined by comparative pool tests and by trial installations. The test procedure consists of drilling the hole, installing the bolt as it normally would be, but with a pulling collar added, and then pulling the bolt with a hydraulic jack assembly and measuring the pulling load and bolt head movement. Readings are taken from the dial gauge at different pulling loads until the load reaches a point where the dial gauge shows continuous movement of the bolt head with no additional increase in load. The point of anchorage failure or permanent stretching of the bolt is determined by plotting the bolt head movement against the pulling load setting. Several pull tests may have to be conducted to determine the best anchor shell and the best anchorage horizon. A torque tension test must also be conducted to determine how many pounds of tension are imposed on the bolt per foot-pound of applied torque. The test is relatively simple in that the load on the bolt is measured with a hydraulic or electrical load cell. It is vitally important that proper torque setting be constant on all bolting devices, because improperly torqued bolts can create assumed safety conditions that are dangerous. The torque on the bolt is simultaneously measured with a torque wrench or digital torque readout. The torque tension ratio is then obtained by dividing the load on the bolt by the torque. Over the years, rock bolting has proven to be a lifesaver, both in the miner's individual safety and to the economic stability of the mining industry itself. Experience has demonstrated that bolts are less likely to be dislodged by blasting than timbers would be, and some deposits previously too costly to mine with timbering can now be mined economically with the use of rock bolts. When rock bolts are used, a miner's work can be carried on more safely and efficiently without the interference of standing or overhead timbers, and the absence of timbers obstructing the mine openings contributes to better ventilation. And while it can be considered one of the great advances in modern mining, much development and research remains to be done. No formula can take into consideration all the variables which might be encountered in an underground opening. It's up to management to develop an effective ground control program and to install a carefully planned bolting pattern to fit the specific mining conditions of their mine. And it's then up to both miners and management to follow this ground control program faithfully in order to make their mine a healthier and safer place in which to work.
I can check that gear in a minute, so don't touch anything, okay? Get down from there! Now!
What if it bumped that control by accident? You'd be mincemeat by now. What have I told you? You don't work on equipment when the engine's running.
Well, I told him not to touch anything. All right, I guess I wasn't thinking.
You weren't thinking? You mean you'll work on engines and machinery and not think of your own personal safety? Here. Shake hands with danger.
Shake hands with danger. Meet a man you ought to know. I used to laugh at safety. Now they call me Three-Fingered Joe. I was young and feisty, never did things by the book. Just let me get my toolbox and I'll take myself a look. I climbed up on a dozier with my mechanic's pride. Said, you can keep it running, friend, while I poke around inside. Shake hands with danger, meet a guy you ought to know. I used to laugh at safety, now they call me Three-Fingered Joe. Although I learned a lesson, I forgot it soon enough. The nicks and burns and scratches showed the young ones I was tough. Till another morning I was grinding on some steel. My other hand got careless and fed my skin into the wheel. Shake hands with danger, step right up and say hello. Grinding wheels and metal are what made me Three-Fingered Joe. I've seen mechanics burning and I've seen them take a fall just to save themselves a minute. I've seen them lose it all. I've watched them courting trouble, seen them take a chance and lose. They get careless for a moment and spend a lifetime with the blues. Shake hands with danger. Some friends I used to know. Compared to them, I'm lucky to be just Three-Fingered Joe.
Yes, we know. Any excuse to show that, or Books Are for Burning. I might have to find a third song that, maybe I'll pull out Garbage in Your Gut, since it's an award-winning song. But, yeah, so that mining safety film. Yeah, we have better ones. I guess I want a little bit more accident and a little less procedure. But that's me. I want blood. Hey, so thanks so much for watching today, as always. And if you like what you saw, you can buy us coffee at ko-fi.com/avgeeks. You can also go to avgeeks.com and buy DVDs. I fixed it. The store was not working. Shame on Square for telling me it was working when it wasn't. But anyways, you can go there and also see other things we have online. And also, the easiest thing you can do that will help us is if you hit the thumbs up button or the like button or subscribe or get notifications about what we do. The other thing is share the gift of AV Geeks by inviting your friends, your enemies, people you meet on the street to watch our show, because that's what we really want to do. Is we want to get these films to new eyeballs. We love your eyeballs, and we will continue to show you stuff, but yeah, bring a friend and spread the word, because that's what we like. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we will see you again tomorrow. It will be equally as hot tomorrow, so I'll be hunkering down, living in the little refrigerator in the basement of the archive. Everybody take care. Bye.